Well, it is day 16 of the trial for Bradley Manning, private first-class Army WikiLeaks leaker, that is, and his defense team's second day of arguments. Today, lawyer David Coombs questioned retired Colonel Morris Davis about Guantanamo Bay detainee policies and information used in their detention. This is important because Manning leaked the assessments of 5 Gitmo detainees to WikiLeaks. RT's Liz Wall joined me just a short time ago from Fort Meade to discuss the importance of this testimony.
That's right. He's a frequent guest on RT. He was also a key witness in the court-martial against Private First Class Bradley Manning today. Colonel Morris Davis testified as an expert on these Guantanamo Bay detainee assessments of the 700,000 documents that Bradley Manning admitted to handing over to WikiLeaks. Are these profiles, these assessments of Guantanamo Bay detainees. Now, essentially, the defense compared these briefs to baseball cards. They contain all types of information on detainees, everything from their names, date of birth, aliases they may have had, biographical information, organizations they may have been affiliated with, all of this information contained in these detainee assessment briefs. Now, when Manning's attorney, David Coombs, questioned Colonel Morris Davis, he was trying to find out if these assessment briefs were closely held U.S. secrets and how damaging they may have been to national security. Now, Colonel Morris Davis, his response was interesting. He said much of the information that was found in these detainee assessment briefs could be found on open sources. People like you or me or anybody out there that really wanted to get a hold of this information, they could do it on their own. They could do it by doing internet searches. They could do it by reading news articles, by reading books that profile these detainees. He also mentioned this movie called Road to Guantanamo, and I believe we do have a clip of it if we could show it.
3 British Muslims en route to a wedding were seized by American forces.
Shut up! Take your head down!
And were sent to the world's most notorious prison.
You're now the property of the U.S. Marine Corps! This is your final destination!
So, yeah, that was a clip of that documentary. Road to Guantanamo. Should mention that it's considered part drama, part documentary. Either way, Colonel Davis said that some of the information he found in these briefs could be found in that very movie. Why is this significant? Because he is saying, you know what? If we could find this information out there on public sources, on movies like the one that you just saw a clip of, that maybe these briefs didn't contain these closely held information that the prosecution is alleging.
That was RT correspondent Liz Wall with the very latest from Fort Meade, and that expert witness that you heard Liz talking about, who took the stand today to talk about Guantanamo Bay detainee policies, is retired Colonel Morris Davis, and he's here in studio with me now. So let's start off by talking about your testimony. What did it do to help or hinder the defense's case?
Well, Private Manning is alleged to have leaked over 700 detainee assessment briefs to WikiLeaks. The government chose 5 specific briefs for 5 different detainees that they charged him as part of the charges. And so what I did was take those 5 briefs and then go to open source documents. Particularly, the Department of Defense in 2006 released the Combatant Status Review Tribunals, the Administrative Review Board. So you can go on the Pentagon's own website and find the documents on the detainees, and if you match them up in the public domain, you can find most of the information that's in these briefs that he's alleged to have committed espionage by making available to WikiLeaks.
And we'll get into your testimony and dig into the nitty-gritty details in just a second, but I did want to bring up a point that the judge wouldn't let you testify as a specialist on national security, but correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't that your title? Weren't you a senior specialist of national security for Congress in the past?
Yeah, there are 30 senior specialists that work for Congress, and I was the only one in national security, but apparently that's not good enough for a court-martial.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's good enough for Congress, good enough for a court-martial.
Very interesting. So according to your testimony, the detainee files that Bradley Manning passed on to WikiLeaks had no value to enemy groups. I think you equated them to baseball cards. Can you tell us what is in them and why you argue that no harm was actually done to U.S. national security?
Yeah, baseball card was a slang term we used to refer to these documents because it gave you the name, the height, the weight, the date of birth, the kind of information you used to see on the back of a baseball card, and then just a narrative description of who the individual was and what they're alleged to have done. But it didn't get into the sources and methods, whether it was intelligence or law enforcement or signals intercepts or other governments that provided information. It didn't get into the sources and methods that are legitimately classified. So the information that's out there, as it was mentioned, like if you watch The Road to Guantanamo, you probably know as much about the three individuals as you'd get from reading their detainee assessment briefs.
So essentially the who, what, when, where, but not necessarily the why or the how.
Right.
Now, Prosecutor Jim Morrow went on to say that the baseball card analogy is a very bad analogy. What is your response to that?
Well, I told it, number one, I didn't make up the term. It was one that was in existence when I came on board, and it was certainly one that I adopted. But it was just, I think, a term that was a flippant shorthand term to refer to these documents that for us were worthless. They had no bearing whatsoever on the military commissions. There were never documents that we attempted to get declassified because they had no use to us. So again, the information in there is just kind of a narrative description of who this individual is, and you can go on the internet now and probably get a more accurate description than you'd get from reading these detainee assessment briefs.
Very interesting. Now, you were a former prosecutor, chief prosecutor of Guantanamo Bay. Talk about the prosecution in your opinion. How are they doing? How's the case stacking up?
Well, I'll give them credit. They were extraordinarily professional and polite, and I was proud of the way that they're representing the military justice system, so I give them great credit for that. I think this case is a case of overcharging. I think many of us that side with Private Manning and have testified for him agree that what he did was wrong in disclosing classified information. But the government is alleging this is espionage, that he intentionally intended to aid the enemy, specifically Al-Qaeda. There's just been no evidence of that. The testimony yesterday from his former colleagues, officers and NCOs that spent time with him in Iraq said he was an outstanding performer, the go-to guy. The opposite picture of the way the government has tried to portray him as a malcontent and a poor performer.
So, a traitor, and that
yes.
is what they're trying him for. So you're a former military man. Talk about the difference between a whistleblower and a traitor.
Well, a traitor is clearly someone that is out to harm their country. And again, here the government is alleged under this espionage charge that he intended to aid Al-Qaeda. All of the testimony so far, including from prosecution witnesses, is that he was a young man that was interested in world events and politics and issues, and that in all the discussions with him, it was his concern about the policies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Never once did he ever mention any ill will towards the United States or desire to help the enemy.
So let's talk about the precedent that this trial could potentially set for the future. We have lots of other whistleblowers that are coming out, from Bank of America all the way over to Edward Snowden in Russia right now. Right. So does this set the precedent for future trials of whistleblowers, or is it kind of a unique case since it's a military tribunal?
Well, I think if the Obama administration, as you recall, when he took office, he said, we're going to be the most open and transparent administration in the history of America. And he's indicted, 7 people under the Espionage Act, more than every other president combined. And I think what they're doing with Manning and with other cases is trying to make an example, particularly in the internet age where it's easier to obtain and to distribute information. I think what they're trying to do is crack down on it by making examples. And I think, again, Private Manning should be held responsible for divulging classified information, but to say a life sentence for espionage, I think is overcharging. And I don't know anyone that has seen what Private Manning has gone through that is not deterred by just the events so far. So I think, a reasonable sentence is what I'm hoping for.
And finally, you had a chance to speak with Private Manning. Quickly, what was he like? What were his feelings like?
Yeah, after I testified, I got to speak with him for just a few moments, and he shook my hand and thanked me for testifying. And I mean, you can tell he seems to be upbeat and positive, but you can tell by looking at him that this is wearing him down and taking a toll on him, as you'd expect.
Very interesting. Colonel Morris Davis, former Guantanamo Bay prosecutor and a professor currently at the law of Howard University. Thank you so much for joining us.